Thank you for tuning in to Praxis at Scale, Issues in Growing Open Education Programs Today. Recently, 3 open education advocates in Tennessee gathered to discuss the challenges our programs are facing as they continue to grow. While our perspectives are based in our experiences here in Tennessee and in the United States, we think that the issues raised are broader. We could and did discuss our struggles and ways forward for hours. We hope these highlights from our conversation will spark wider discussions.
At East Tennessee State University, our affordability program is called Open and Affordable Course Materials Initiatives. We started in the 2017-2018 academic year when our students decided to use the student library fee on these initiatives, and we officially launched them in 2018-2019. And our main short-term goal was just to raise awareness and encourage the use of open and affordable materials.
At the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, we started 2016 to 2017 academic year with our Affordable Course Materials Initiative, also focused on affordability as well as open. And our main goals were to raise awareness.
Yeah, the project that I coordinate now is called Tennessee Open Education. We started in about 2019. And it's a statewide initiative to sort of increase the culture of open in Tennessee, which includes faculty support, increasing faculty awareness, and then some grant projects to sort of increase the use of open in coursework.
In spring 2022, we were actually able to give a presentation to Faculty Senate, the Student Government Association, and Academic Council on the growth of our initiatives. And we had a lot of good data to show that. So we were able to show that we save students money, that the faculty and students like the open and affordable materials, and that we were able to publish a diverse collection of open educational resources.
At UTC recently, we crossed over $1 million saved for students in our grassroots program. So that was a pretty big success, and seeing some of that awareness spread across campus, as well as some OER publications that have been increasing.
The thing that I'd highlight is coordination of faculty using OER, just bringing together and highlighting all the work that the faculty in Tennessee are doing.
I'm fascinated with how COVID-19 affected programs, because it had a huge impact on my program, where faculty were suddenly extremely interested, and I had a huge spike in interest in how I get students my materials, but also a lot more interest in creating open materials.
I will say it did affect our data collection. So we were planning on doing paper surveys to get a higher response rate. We had to do all of our surveys online. And we also weren't able to do benchmarks like GPAs or drop fail incomplete rates, because COVID affected those so greatly that, we can't compare the years before and after with it.
A lot of the work that we do is sort of relying on faculty to contribute extra time, sometimes with extra compensation, but sometimes just in a volunteer capacity. And the biggest impact that I think we see post-COVID is a change in the willingness to do that. And so it's causing us to sort of rethink the ways that we support faculty who are redesigning course materials around open and affordable.
At least at East Tennessee State University, what we discuss a lot is that faculty and administrators will view open education as an obvious consideration, but then that we also have the systematic support structures to then achieve what they're wanting.
From sort of the state level, the thing that we think about all the time is creating a culture of open across the institutions in Tennessee.
I think about faculty having support and recognition, not just from my affordability program, but from their home departments and from administration, as well as having community and the ability to collaborate at my institution, but also with their colleagues across Tennessee.
I mean, there has to be a path, right? The pathway is not super clear because it's contingent on a number of variables. And in a lot of ways, it's contingent on individuals who are in sort of middle management positions or early career positions at various institutions. So to some extent, the pathway looks different as people sort of job change or are promoted or their responsibilities change. But there has to be a pathway forward. I think the pathway forward has to include some sustainable support in terms of money, some sustainable support in terms of people and resources, platforms, and then recognition for people working in this space, And then also sort of moving towards a culture of collaboration, not just amongst institutions. I think we do that well right now, but between institutions. And that's just harder for a variety of reasons. So there is a pathway forward. It's just not all the time clear. But I think we can get to a place where open is sort of more of a default, more of a first consideration.
In the meantime, I think individual institutions are just trying to make sure that their programs stay afloat and momentum keeps going. So by the time we get there, we're all ready for it.
My main effort is kind of maintaining what I've got happening. So the energy forward is less than it was at the outset, where, it was very clear like what to do.
I know our assistant director of the Center for Teaching Excellence would definitely say more open pedagogy. On my level, I would like to spend more time on outreach, support, and publishing. We don't have a lot of services for publishing.
Exactly where I would like to be going as well.
Just functionally more support. Some of that is money. Some of it is publishing platforms, a more stable repository system. But then the other side of it is being more intentional about connecting the sort of use of open textbooks to quality education or high impact educational practices. So that what we're doing is more than just replacing an expensive textbook or a mainline textbook with something that's open.
There's so many resources, so many programs, so many people doing so many things, and it is very difficult not to end up comparing yourself.
I always feel like we're behind. I always feel like we could be doing more and better things. I feel like open is a real catalyst for high quality learning. And I feel a big burden to help sort of spread that gospel, if you want, and get people involved.
There's only so much time in the day. It does always feel like there's so much more we could be doing.
Each of us have other things that we do in our job responsibilities that aren't open. That makes it challenging, right? There are a number of times when I have to focus on these other projects that aren't open, but it means that the progress in expanding our use of open or expanding the impact of open statewide is just slowed because I got to do some other stuff.
And I think a lot about smaller institutions. I'm a librarian, so what can I be doing to help the librarians at other institutions who don't have this official duty? How can I make the barriers to entry lower for those individuals, so that they can be providing the same level of support that I'm able to.
Being able to show that it's bigger than what we're doing at ETSU, and it adds a more legitimacy to the topic of open education and affordable materials.
We talk all the time about the economy of scale. It's one thing to try to fund a class that's going to have 20 students in it every semester. It's another thing to try to fund a course that is offered at many institutions and has several hundred students in it. It's easier to find willing partners to invest in that kind of redesign at the state level. So, we can think about and apply the economies of scale for various programmatic support kind of resources that we're hoping to fund and find. But then beyond that, right, like the thing that I think happens, or that I see happening all the time at the state level, is we'll have meetings, people will raise challenges, and somebody in the state has already sort of come up with a solution to that challenge. And so we're able to share not a really near peer fix for challenges that would otherwise derail important work. Really sharing and developing a community of practice or a community of practitioners, I think, has really been instrumental in moving the needle, moving our individual programs forward.
One of my biggest challenges with collaboration is that everything seems to work so much better when it is localized. So even though there's resources available, it still takes a significant amount of time to implement those strategies and kind of cater everything to your specific context.
That challenge is compounded by the fact that creative work takes effort, and it's not always the effort that's like most urgently required. So often it feels like we get pulled away, or I get pulled away, or people that I'm trying to collaborate with get pulled away to put out some other fire. compounded again by the fact that most of the folks that are working on open in Tennessee aren't doing it as their full-time job. They're doing it in addition to other responsibilities and often other significant responsibilities.
We may not have, one person on a campus doing it. We might have 5 different people doing a small amount of work with OER. And then how do you make everyone, when we're collaborating, feel involved
Right.
without then having an overwhelming amount of people in a meeting and not having a good focus?
Figuring out how to distribute the work, right? You have one project and 20 people who can participate in it. Like how do we get stuff done practically?
At the beginning, I think we were really successful in the models of having the smaller work groups. And then those work groups had very specific tasks that they had to complete. Like we had to do a webinar and we were able to achieve that. So I found that to be really helpful.
I feel like it was easier to find definable projects when we had started. What repository are we using? It's a foundational question. Some of the challenges as the program goes on are bigger. How do we find legislative support, right? Like that's a simple question that doesn't easily reduce itself to a simple answer that can be, 5 people working together for a month.
I was lucky enough to be able to convene folks working on open education at the University of Tennessee system institutions. But one of the difficulties we ran into is that our priorities and our focuses are very different. So our interests didn't completely align, and that made it a little bit more difficult to get in step.
Institutions are looking to make improvement in different areas, and an effort towards open, it just fits in differently at different institutions. So figuring out how to sort of tailor the case for open and the case for affordable at different institutions, it's just challenging. It's not the same. It's not one set of talking points. It can't be. It goes back to something that we've already said, that like figuring out how to localize or particularize sort of a general set of things that are working. It takes somebody on campus who's going to know what the areas of focus are at that campus, who sees the value of open and is willing to sort of take something that's working elsewhere and apply it into their situation. The solution that I think that is worth sort of thinking about here is just meet and collaborate. Nothing happens collaboratively when you're not meeting regularly. It sometimes feels like we don't have anything significant to cover, but I think that when we meet, issues come up. You hear about things that are working elsewhere. You allow yourself to be creative, to spend some time thinking about next steps. Even though it's hard, continue to try to collaborate, I think, is a solution.
At that plateau where we're at, looking at scaling up to the next level, we're in a kind of a chicken and egg dilemma where I'm able to support the programs that we have, but I'm, stretched thin. So I'm not able to get to the level where I'm demonstrating enough need to get additional assistance, which would then, rocket my program forward.
If you had more funding, you would be able to do more. But in order to get the funding, you have to show that you can do more.
I hope that we can get to the place where we're providing some more centralized support for the authorship and the adaptation of open resources. So thinking about accessibility services, copy editing stuff, assistance with Creative Commons licensing, and making sure you don't run afoul of various copyright policies. And these things are all in existence on the campuses. But again, it's people who do this as an extra thing, being able to provide like a go-to centralized, like, here's some people you can talk to when you're creating or adapting resources. I think we have to do anything and everything we can to help reduce the burden of effort, and that requires investment.
Ryan, those services that you mentioned were exactly my biggest pain point as we scaled up. I'd get a faculty who was interested in authoring new OER, help me make something that looks as good as other materials that are out there. A nice polished product was something that I was not prepared for and was a struggle. And those are the kinds of services that now that we have so much extremely high quality OER out there, that I think faculty do expect from the get-go. It's a barrier that is new, I think, compared to 10 years ago.
It's part and parcel of moving from a grassroots effort where the goal is to just create OER materials to something that's a little bit more nuanced. We're paying attention to different components of the resources that we're creating. That requires different knowledge. It requires a different set of skills, and because of that requires different support. And we have an opportunity, or maybe even an obligation, to provide that support.
So our programs are mentioned in our campus strategic plan, and that helps, especially when we're talking to administrators on that level. Ashley, you were talking to faculty senate.
One thing that we mentioned a lot was tenure and promotion, making sure that open educational resources is included in tenure and promotion policies, because we do have faculty who are hesitant to get on board with it because, well, it's not going to count for my tenure or promotion. But if you have it on paper, you can say, look, I can do this and I know it's going to be fine.
And then at the state level, we're thinking more state policy and legislative.
Yeah, we have currently a textbook cost component of our state statute, and it was written, frankly, a long time ago. And so what it does is it directs faculty to consider low-cost alternatives first. But the question is, how is that sort of enforced, and what does it mean? The benefits of policy: it provides direction to effort. The downside is it maybe doesn't consider all the directions for effort. By the time we get to state level policy, we're really looking at a real high level. I think the policy that we have, or the statute that we have, is an interesting example. We're supposed to be, as faculty in Tennessee, considering the lowest cost option first. What does that mean? Who's in charge of doing that? How do you determine even what the lowest cost is? What tools can you, as a faculty member, use to find those resources? None of that is spelled out in policy.
I've seen campus policies from around the state, and they range from glancing towards that policy to being very prescriptive in a way that I would not appreciate. I think that is one of the struggles working at the policy level. If I, come down from the provost and tell people you've got to do this, that is going to wash away all of the grassroots support that I've been able to encourage.
Who is making sure that these policies are being followed is a big thing. On my campus, inevitably someone says, we should have a policy on it. And then you have to say, well, we do. And so even if policies exist, it doesn't mean that people know about them.
What do we need to get an updated legislative support? What are we working on?
I mean, from my perspective, it has to start with collaboration amongst the individuals who are carrying out programs on individual campuses. So we have to start by saying, what policies do you have? How are they being implemented on your campus? What data are you collecting? From there, we can start to think about what's going to work at the state level that's going to sort of substantiate the gains and allow people the flexibility to do what they need to do on their individual campuses. I think it's a hard thing to pull together. I think we need a lot. I think we need participation. We need to see multiple sides of this. We need participation from faculty, from staff, from campus bookstores, librarians, administrators, and from the legislature. So it's a big puzzle to sort of fit all together. But I think it starts by having strategic conversations with people who are managing programs.
At my institution, having an advisory group or a faculty working group is something that I would really like to have that I don't have. When I reflect on why don't I have that, it does come back to what you were saying earlier, Ryan, about the effort it takes to do creative work, drafting charges and identifying the folks who would be involved in that, really thinking about what are the kinds of work that I want that group to be doing at my institution. It takes a lot of effort, and that is competing with, kind of more urgent needs. So dedicated planning time would go a long way for me in getting policy support and moving my program to that next level.
When we talk about, collecting our data, what standards are we going to use, what data we need to collect, seems like certain campuses are going to have more of a burden to try to collect data than others. So maybe the bookstore isn't going to give them the information. So that means that they're going to have to do a lot of manually, maybe asking faculty if they're using the books, making sure that the institutions with less aren't having to do all this extra work in order to be part of the collaboration on a state level.
The first sort of step towards that is being really careful to think about what data we need and what's actionable and useful and who it's actionable and useful for. So that we're not just requesting all this data that's going to sit in an Excel file and never be good for anything. Finding that line between having enough data to make a case versus trying to just set an unrealistic data request that nobody's going to have the time to do. I think that's something that OER sort of across the nation struggles with, to be honest.
Having local data is more impactful for your faculty. So when I show my faculty members my data from our student survey, they're like, oh yeah, this is, very important for our students. And if I had told them just like, the Viva survey shows this very clearly, they'd be like, well, and that's in Virginia. So we're ending up repeating work that we don't necessarily need to be repeating.
Well, the other thing that I think is worth mentioning when we're talking about data is that I think sometimes the process that we use to collect data gets in the way or leaves out steps that would make that data more useful elsewhere. So thinking just simply about IRB, right? Like we can collect all kinds of data for use in program evaluation. That same data, if we had our IRB approval, would be really useful to talk about demonstrating the impact through more sort of strategic research. When you don't sort of know what program you're going to have, you're trying to get it off the ground. And so, a lot of times it's hard to get that IRB approval so that you can move on and use the data. You're just trying to get a program off the ground. You're not thinking about 4 or 5 years down.
So what can we, as a broader open community, both us in Tennessee and everyone who may be watching the video, do to support each other if we're in this phase of stuck in the middle, looking to scale up, dealing with the challenges that we're talking about?
I think continuing to share resources publicly is always helpful, whether you're just starting an awards program or you're wanting to go more statewide. But then also, how did you get there? I think we put the results on our websites a lot, but maybe not as much documentation. Well, this is all the data we collected, and this is how we collected it on our website that someone could copy. So that the processes tend to be just as important as the results.
We talked earlier about some places that we, look for inspiration. And the thing is, we see them kind of from afar, and they're likely facing these exact same challenges, struggling towards what does sustainability look like.
This work is difficult. And so it's important to celebrate the wins as they happen. None of the three of us are at the place where we want to be with our programs. But also there's been a lot accomplished up to this point, and we need to stop and we need to recognize that as good, because it is, even if it's not kind of all that we want. The other thing that I would say too is the broader community, I think, is really responsive and honest. And that's really helpful too, because the larger trajectory seems to be like, learn from my mistakes, learn from my successes, both. And let me tell you about all of it. And I think that is something unique to this sort of larger open community that we just need to capitalize on a whole lot more.
Yeah, we have so much great resources, especially for program startup, because we all started up programs and then we thought we could make this better for the next folks. And then we did, but we can also be doing the same in this phase too. So it's going to be specific to your institutions and your programs, but here are the stumbling blocks that you're going to run into, and know that that's normal. And have the resources that have been successful. There's always more. That's what we talked about. So even as we progress, it's going to seem like we're still in this growing phase, because there's always something better that we could be doing.
Yes, going through this process of discussing it, I think what I would like to see would be us to continue to collaborate and continue to meet, but maybe come up with our long-term goals, and then just some really short, easier things that we could do to achieve it, and that we can look back on. So when we're thinking like, oh man, we gotta keep going, we can say, but we did XYZ this year.
Marking that progress and getting there step by step. Yeah. Thank you again for tuning into our session.